There's a hidden war that raged for centuries, unseen by the masses, but etched into the very stones of ancient civilizations. Picture this: the masterminds behind colossal pyramids, the engineers who bent geometry to their will, locked in a silent struggle with the high priests who claimed to speak for the gods. This wasn't a battle fought with swords or armies, but with blueprints and blessings, with mathematics and miracles. The prize, nothing less than the right to shape humanity's connection to the divine. From the sun-baked plains of Mesopotamia to the shadowed corridors of Egyptian temples, this secret conflict determined who held the true power: the builders who touched the sky with their monuments, or the holy men who claimed to bridge heaven and earth. What makes this ancient rivalry so fascinating isn't just the drama, it's the fact that this struggle echoes even today. Think about it: the tension between innovation and tradition, between those who seek to push boundaries and those who guard sacred knowledge, is as old as civilization itself. The pyramids weren't just tombs, they were statements. The ziggurats weren't just temples, they were battlegrounds. Every stone placed, every ritual performed, was a move in a high-stakes game to control the narrative of divine power. And here's the twist: the engineers often knew secrets the priests didn't: mathematical alignments with the stars, hidden chambers that defied explanation. Was their knowledge a threat to the divine order, or was it something even more profound? This is the story we're about to unravel, a tale of ambition, faith, and the relentless human drive to reach beyond what seems possible. We'll walk through the sacred sites where these clashes unfolded, decode the symbols left behind, and piece together how this hidden war shaped the course of history. Why does it matter now? Because the same forces that drove these ancient conflicts, the hunger for control, the awe of the unknown, the tension between progress and tradition, still shape our world today. So come with me as we step into the shadows of the past, where the line between engineer and priest, between science and scripture, was far thinner than you might think. The truth is waiting. To understand the rise of ancient engineers, we have to step into a world where knowledge was power, and not just any power, but the kind that could shake the foundations of belief. These were not mere laborers hauling stones. They were architects of the impossible, thinkers who saw the cosmos in angles and equations. Take Imhotep, for example, a man so revered in ancient Egypt that he was later worshipped as a god. His step pyramid at Saqqara wasn't just a tomb, it was a revolution in stone, a structure so advanced it made the old mastaba tombs look like child's play. But here's the thing: Imhotep wasn't just an engineer, he was also a high priest, and that duality tells us everything. The engineers of Mesopotamia were no different. The ziggurats they built, those towering step temples, weren't just religious symbols. They were precise astronomical instruments, aligned with the stars in ways that predicted seasons, floods, and celestial events. The priests may have claimed to interpret the god's will, but the engineers, they could predict it. Imagine the tension that must have stirred. When a priest said the gods demanded rain, and an engineer's calculations proved it was coming, who did the people trust? The one who spoke in prayers, or the one who spoke in numbers? What set these builders apart wasn't just skill, it was access to secrets. The mathematics behind their structures, the hidden chambers, the way sunlight would pierce a temple corridor only on the solstice. These weren't accidents. They were deliberate, calculated feats that blurred the line between human ingenuity and divine intervention. And that's where the real conflict began. If an engineer could command the heavens with geometry, what need was there for a priest to mediate? This wasn't just about buildings, it was about control. The priests held sway over the unseen world, but the engineers made the unseen tangible. They didn't just believe in the gods, they built gateways to them. And in doing so, they forced a question that echoes through history: who truly holds power, those who claim to speak for the divine, or those who can prove its patterns in stone? The priests held a monopoly on the divine, or so they claimed. In the hushed inner sanctums of temples, where incense curled toward the heavens, they alone could read the signs etched in animal entrails or the flight patterns of birds. Their power didn't come from force, but from fear and wonder. To question a priest was to risk the wrath of the gods themselves. In Babylon, the high priest of Marduk didn't just advise kings, he anointed them, his voice framing the ruler's legitimacy as a gift from the gods. In Egypt, the priesthood of Ammon controlled vast lands, wealth, and even the oracle that answered Pharaoh's most urgent pleas. Their authority was absolute because they controlled the narrative. The gods spoke through them and no one else. But then came the engineers, quietly dismantling that monopoly, one perfect measurement at a time. When a temple's alignment predicted an eclipse down to the minute, or a pyramid's shadow marked the solstice as reliably as any priest's chant, people noticed. The priests had rituals, the engineers had results, and that was dangerous. Imagine the high priest of Thebes watching as crowds gathered not at the altar, but at the foot of an obelisk, waiting for its shadow to touch a specific mark on the ground, a moment calculated, not prayed for. What happened to the priest's authority when the gods seemed to obey mathematics? The priests fought back, of course. They shrouded their rituals in even deeper secrecy, insisting that true understanding required sacred initiation, not just clever calculations. They warned that tampering with divine patterns invited disaster, and sometimes they made sure disaster struck. Records from Mesopotamia hint at accidents befalling architects who grew too bold, their innovations branded as arrogance. The message was clear: the gods favored tradition, not trespassers. Yet the engineers had one advantage the priests couldn't erase: their work endured. Stone doesn't forget. Every perfectly angled corridor, every celestial alignment built into a temple's design, was a quiet rebellion, proof that the sacred could be studied, replicated, even mastered. The priests may have claimed the keys to the gods, but the engineers were building their own doors, and that changed everything. The Great Pyramid of Giza stands as more than a marvel of ancient engineering. It was a declaration, a challenge carved in stone. Every perfect angle, every precise alignment with Orion's belt, whispered something revolutionary. The cosmos could be measured, understood, even replicated by human hands. For the priests, this wasn't just innovation, it was insurrection. The gods spoke in mysteries, not mathematics. How dare mortals claim to map the heavens as if they were mere scribes taking dictation? Yet there it was, a mountain of stone proving that divine patterns could be captured in geometry. The pyramid's very existence asked a dangerous question. If the sacred could be calculated, did that make the engineers the new intermediaries of the gods? Mesopotamia's ziggurats tell a similar story. These towering structures weren't just stairways to heaven, they were celestial calendars. The priests climbed their steps to perform rituals, but the architects had designed them so precisely that the movements of Venus and the solstices could be predicted from their terraces. Imagine the tension when a priest proclaimed the god's will, only for an engineer to point to a shadow creeping across a marked stone, confirming or contradicting the divine message. The ziggurat's dual purpose exposed a rift. Was the sacred a matter of revelation or observation? This first great conflict wasn't just about buildings. It was about the nature of truth itself. The priests wielded tradition, their authority rooted in centuries of unchanging rites. The engineers offered something far more unsettling: proof. When the Nile's flood arrived exactly when a pyramid's alignment predicted, or when a ziggurat stairs framed a lunar eclipse to the hour, faith in the old intermediaries wavered. The priests fought back, of course. They labeled precise astronomy as hubris, warning that mortals who sought to trap the divine in numbers risked divine wrath. Some engineers vanished from records mid-project. Others found their innovations attributed to priestly visions rather than their own calculations. Yet the stone refused to lie. The pyramids and ziggurats still stand, their silent precision a testament to that ancient struggle. They remind us that the battle between faith and knowledge isn't a modern invention. It's as old as civilization's first bold attempt to reach for the stars. And the most striking lesson, both sides were right. The engineers revealed the patterns of the cosmos, but the priests understood something equally vital, that humanity craves not just answers but meaning. The true conflict wasn't over who could predict the gods' designs, but who could define their purpose. Walk through the sacred corridors of the Parthenon, and you're stepping into more than a temple. You're entering a debate carved in marble. The Greeks didn't just build, they argued in geometry. Every column's spacing, every curve of the stylobate whispers the golden ratio, a mathematical secret hidden in plain sight. The engineers who designed it weren't merely showing off their skills, they were making a claim. Divinity, they implied, wasn't locked away in cryptic chants. It lived in the perfect harmony of numbers, a language anyone with knowledge could decipher. Now tilt your gaze upward to the hieroglyphs crawling across Egypt's temple ceilings. The priests had their own reply. Those intricate carvings weren't just decoration, they were a barrier. Only the initiated could read them, could unravel the stories of gods whose wills defied simple calculation. Where engineers saw patterns, priests saw paradoxes, truths too vast for mortal minds to fully grasp. The same temple walls that held precise astronomical alignments also bore inscriptions warning against unworthy eyes daring to probe the divine. This duality played out across civilizations. In India, the mandala-shaped temples encoded the Fibonacci sequence into their very foundations, their spiraling layouts mirroring the growth patterns of ferns and galaxies. Yet the innermost sanctuaries, the garbhagritas, were shrouded in darkness, accessible only after elaborate purification rites. The message was clear: yes, the universe follows rules, but understanding them alone won't grant you entry to the sacred. Even the materials spoke this coded language. The Babylonians baked mathematical tablets into their ziggurat foundations, equations for predicting lunar eclipses tucked beneath layers of ritual offerings. The Maya built observatories with doorways framing Venus's cycle, yet painted those same doorways with scenes of bloodletting rituals, a stark reminder that celestial knowledge alone couldn't appease the gods. What makes this silent war so fascinating is how both sides were right. The engineers proved the cosmos obeyed elegant principles. The priests understood that humans crave more than equations, they long for meaning, for intermediaries who can translate the terrifying vastness of the divine into something approachable. The temples still standing today are compromises, stone treaties between two irreconcilable truths, that the universe can be measured and that it must still be worshipped. Look up at the night sky through the eyes of an ancient engineer, and you'd see something extraordinary, not just stars, but a celestial blueprint. The pyramids of Giza don't just point north, they mirror the belt of Orion with uncanny precision. The Temple of Karnak aligns so perfectly with the winter solstice sunrise that its inner sanctum floods with golden light on that single day each year, as if the sun itself were obeying human design. These weren't accidents, they were acts of defiance. By encoding astronomical knowledge into stone, engineers were proving that the heavens operated by rules that could be measured, predicted, and even harnessed. But the priests had a different interpretation. To them, the movement of stars wasn't just mechanics, it was the handwriting of the gods. When Sirius rose heliacally just before the Nile's annual flood, priests declared it a divine signal, a message from the gods that only they could translate. Their monopoly on astrology wasn't just about prediction, it was about control. They framed celestial events as cryptic omens, insisting that without their sacred rituals, the stars' warnings would go unheeded. Imagine the tension when an engineer's calculations predicted an eclipse to the minute, while a priest claimed it was a sign of the gods' displeasure. Whose version of truth would the people believe? This clash of worldviews played out in the very architecture of sacred sites. In Mesopotamia, the ziggurat of was built with staircases angled to track the phases of Venus. Engineers could have used this to predict planetary movements, but priests turned those same staircases into stages for rituals, declaring that the planet's path revealed the mood of the goddess Ishtar. The same stars, the same alignments, but two competing narratives. One said the cosmos was a clockwork marvel, the other said it was a pulsing, living will. Yet the engineers held a trump card: repeatability. When a temple doorway framed the equinox sunrise year after year, or a pyramid's shadow marked the solstice like clockwork, it undermined the priest's claim that the gods spoke in unpredictable whispers. Stone doesn't lie, and that's why, in the end, the engineers' legacy endured. Their alignments still work today, millennia later, while the priests' interpretations faded into myth. But here's the twist: neither side was entirely wrong. The engineers revealed the mechanics of the heavens, but the priests understood something deeper: that humanity doesn't just crave knowledge of the stars. We long to feel they're speaking to us. Consider the stones of Machu Picchu, massive granite blocks cut so precisely that not even a razor blade can slip between them. Modern engineers still debate how the Inca achieved such perfection without iron tools or the wheel. Then there's the Antikythera mechanism, a 2,000-year-old Greek device with gears so intricate it could predict eclipses and track the Olympic cycle. These weren't just feats of craftsmanship, they were leaps of intellect that defy the timeline of progress we've been taught. If ancient engineers could calibrate celestial events with clockwork precision or manipulate sound waves in temple chambers to create eerie acoustic effects, what else did they know, and why was that knowledge allowed to vanish? The priests had every reason to fear these technologies. Imagine a world where sacred rituals relied on the mystery of celestial events, only for an engineer to unveil a bronze machine that could predict them flawlessly. Suddenly, the divine wasn't inscrutable, it was calculable. Temples like Egypt's Dendera feature carvings some interpret as ancient light bulbs, while the Baghdad battery suggests experiments with electricity centuries before its official discovery. Were these inventions hidden away because they threatened the idea that only the priesthood could channel divine power? The scarcity of records is telling. Unlike religious texts which were meticulously preserved, technical manuals and engineering schematics rarely survived. What we're left with are fragments: a gear here, a mysteriously cut stone there, hinting at a systematic purge of knowledge that didn't fit the approved narrative. But here's the twist: some technologies may have been lost not through suppression, but through secrecy. Guilds of master builders guarded their techniques like state secrets, passing them down orally to prevent rivals or priests from stealing their advantage. The construction of the Great Pyramid's inner chambers, with their precise alignment to magnetic north, suggests a level of geodetic knowledge that disappears from records shortly afterward. Was this intentional? When the Roman architect Vitruvius wrote about ancient engineering marvels, he often admitted their methods were already forgotten in his own time. The line between lost and stolen blurs when power is at stake. What makes these gaps so tantalizing is how they challenge our assumptions. We think of technological progress as a straight line, but history is full of collapses and resets. The Antikythera mechanism had no equal for over 1,000 years. The acoustic properties of Malta's hypogeum, where whispers carry eerily across underground chambers, suggest an understanding of sound waves that wouldn't be rediscovered until the 19th century. If these weren't flukes but part of a broader, vanished science, then the ancient power struggle wasn't just about control, it was about rewriting humanity's relationship with the cosmos. The priests may have won the battle of the records, but the stones still whisper their secrets to those who know how to listen. The priesthood's counterattack wasn't waged with weapons, but with words carefully chosen, meticulously controlled. In the hallowed halls of Egypt's temple schools, young scribes learned a rewritten history. The pyramids weren't built by mortal hands, but delivered by the gods themselves. Mathematical papyri framed geometry as divine revelation, their solutions attributed to Thoth, the god of wisdom, rather than the engineers who'd painstakingly derived them. Even Imhotep, the architect-turned-deity, became less a man of genius and more a vessel for heavenly inspiration. The message was clear: innovation wasn't human triumph, it was sacred charity. Mesopotamia's priests employed even subtler tactics. Cuneiform tablets detailing architectural advances often began with elaborate prayers, framing breakthroughs as answers to priestly divination. A new method for calculating brick quantities, the goddess Nisaba's blessing, a breakthrough in irrigation, the result of a high priest's sacrificial omens. By embedding technical knowledge within religious narrative, they made it impossible to separate engineering from dogma. To study mathematics was to submit to theology. The ziggurate's precise astronomical alignments weren't celebrated as human achievement. They were proofs of the gods' benevolence toward their chosen interpreters. This intellectual siege had devastating consequences. The Ebers Papyrus, one of ancient Egypt's most advanced medical texts, attributes its remedies not to experimentation, but to dreams sent by Serket, the scorpion goddess. Practical knowledge was shackled to mysticism, its origins obscured. Meanwhile, in Mesopotamia, the library of Ashurbanipal, though a marvel of preservation, curated a selective truth. Tablets celebrating priestly visions survived. Manuals on metallurgy or structural engineering did not. The pattern echoes across civilizations. The Maya's Dresden Codex preserves intricate astronomical charts but credits them to the maize god's revelations, while Indian Vastu Shastra texts blur architecture with ritual until the two became indistinguishable. The chilling question isn't just what was lost, but why. When the Greek historian Herodotus asked Egyptian priests about pyramid construction, they spoke of ramps built by divine command. No mention of the ingenious counterweight systems or copper tools that modern archaeology has since uncovered. This wasn't mere oversight, it was active erasure. By severing humanity from its own ingenuity, the priesthood ensured that wonder would always circle back to worship. The engineers' greatest threat wasn't their skill, it was their potential to prove that mortals could touch the divine without intermediaries. And that was a truth too dangerous to be left unchained. Beneath the grand temples and towering monuments, another story was unfolding, one written in coded symbols and whispered oaths. Across the ancient world, engineers began forming secret societies, not out of rebellion but survival. The Dionysian architects of Rome weren't just master builders, they were keepers of forbidden geometry, passing down techniques through initiation rites so strict that disclosing their secrets meant death. In India, the creators of the rust-defying iron pillar, a metallurgical marvel still unexplained by modern science, left no manuals, only the silent testament of their work. These weren't isolated geniuses. They were nodes in a hidden network, trading knowledge like contraband under the priest's watchful gaze. What made these groups so dangerous? They proved that divine craftsmanship could be taught, while priests claimed sacred techniques were divinely revealed to chosen intermediaries. The guilds demonstrated otherwise. A stonemason in Mesopotamia could teach an Egyptian how to calculate load-bearing arches using only a knotted cord and shadows. A Greek hydraulic engineer might share the secret of siphon systems with a Persian builder, all without invoking a single god's name. This wasn't just skill sharing, it was heresy. If engineering could cross borders and cultures without priestly blessing, then the sacred wasn't so exclusive after all. The methods of these underground networks were ingenious. Complex mathematical formulas were disguised as poetry or woven into myth. The Pythagorean theorem appears in Vedic texts as a hymn to Agni, the fire god. Architectural blueprints were hidden in plain sight. The dimensions of Solomon's temple, for instance, encode geometric principles that later resurfaced in Gothic cathedrals centuries later. Even materials held clues. The Roman concrete used in the Pantheon, which self-heals cracks to this day, contained volcanic ash from a specific region, a recipe guarded so closely that its exact composition vanished for nearly 2 millennia. But the most compelling evidence of this shadow war lies in the anomalies, the outliers that defy official timelines. How did the precision-cut granite boxes in Egypt's Serapeum, with their 90-degree inner angles and seamless corners, appear millennia before the supposed invention of such tools? Why do Masonic lodges still use symbols found in both pharaonic workshops and medieval stonemason guilds? The connections suggest an unbroken chain, a lineage of builders who preserved what the priesthood tried to erase. Their greatest victory wasn't just in the structures they left behind, but in the realization they forced upon the world that the divine could be studied, shared, and yes, even stolen. The grand temples of Jerusalem held secrets within their walls, not just scrolls or sacred relics, but hidden engineering marvels. Beneath the altar, a labyrinth of channels and chambers funneled sacrificial blood away with eerie efficiency, a hydraulic system so advanced it seemed to purify the offerings by divine hand. The priests didn't just tolerate this innovation, they sanctified it, declaring the very stones of the temple had been guided by angels. Here was the compromise: if you couldn't suppress engineering, you could claim it as holy. The same pattern unfolded in India, where the Brihadiswara temple's towering Vimana, a 200-foot stone spire, was said to float above its base, held aloft by sacred chants. The truth, a masterful distribution of weight and precision-cut granite disguised as miracle. This clerical co-opting of technology was more than pragmatism, it was a reinvention of power. The high priests of Babylon didn't abolish the ziggurate's astronomical alignments, they rebranded them. The star charts used by engineers became celestial scripts, decipherable only through priestly ritual. Even Rome's Pantheon, with its oculus flooding light onto the altar at precise solar events, was framed not as an architect's triumph, but as Jupiter's eye gazing upon the faithful. The message was clear: innovation could exist, but only as an extension of doctrine. Yet the tension never truly faded. Consider the sacred automata of Byzantine churches, mechanical birds that sang at appointed hours, powered by hidden gears and declared embodiments of the Holy Spirit. Or the Eleusinian mysteries, where initiates walked through underground corridors that amplified whispers into thunderous echoes, a feat of acoustics attributed to Demeter's voice. These hybrid wonders walked a razor's edge, awe-inspiring enough to command reverence, but shrouded enough to preserve the priesthood's role as gatekeepers. What makes this chapter so revealing is the paradox at its heart. the priests who claimed to transcend the material world became its most meticulous curators. They didn't reject engineering, they hollowed it out, leaving the shell of innovation while draining away its subversive potential. The divine machine could dazzle, but it could never speak for itself. That privilege remained reserved for those who stood at the altar, interpreting its hum as sacred language. And so the war continued, not with suppression, but with sleight of hand, turning the engineer's greatest triumphs into the priesthood's most potent props. Pharaoh Akhenaten's reign should have been a triumph for the engineers. Here was a ruler who tore down the old gods, replacing them with a single solar deity whose movements could be predicted with mathematical precision. His new capital, Amarna, was laid out along strict astronomical alignments, its temples designed to catch the first rays of Aten, the sun disk, at exact angles. The priests of Ammon never forgave him for it. After his death, they systematically dismantled his legacy, smashing statues, chiseling his name from monuments, and relegating him to official oblivion as the heretic king. Akhenaten's fate wasn't just political, it was a warning. When engineering ambition threatened priestly control, even pharaohs could be erased. Meanwhile, across the ocean, the Myas-Ahau rulers were perfecting a different strategy. These weren't just kings, they were living bridges between heaven and earth, performing bloodletting rituals atop pyramids that doubled as celestial calendars. The same structures that tracked Venus with astonishing accuracy also served as stages for sacred drama, where the ruler's pierced tongue or genitals dripped blood onto parchment burned as offerings. The message was unmistakable. Yes, we measure the stars, but only through pain and piety can we truly commune with them. By merging temple and throne, the Ahau made sure no engineer could outshine their divine mandate. By the time the Iron Age dawned, the pattern was set. In Babylon, the Enuma Anu Enlil tablets detailed astronomical records were consulted exclusively by priest astrologers who framed celestial events as omens. The Parthenon's perfect proportions became attributes of Athena's wisdom rather than human calculation. Even Rome, that bastion of practical engineering, demanded its architects kneel before the Pontifex Maximus, the high priest who interpreted Jupiter's will. The engineers' role slowly shifted from innovators to implementers, their brilliance funneled into serving systems they no longer controlled. Yet for all their victories, the priests couldn't stamp out the embers of dissent entirely. Hidden in plain sight, the old knowledge endured. The precise solar alignments of Newgrange's passage tomb in Ireland still functioned, long after its builders' names were forgotten. The Indus Valley's standardized brick sizes evidence of advanced metrology continued to be used centuries after the civilization's collapse. Most telling of all were the medieval cathedral builders, who encoded Pythagorean harmonics into their soaring arches while publicly crediting divine inspiration. The war wasn't over, it had just gone underground, waiting for the moment when human hands could once again claim credit for reaching the heavens. The soaring spires of Notre Dame didn't just pierce the sky, they shattered the old boundaries between engineering and the sacred. For the first time in centuries, stone itself seemed to defy gravity, as flying buttresses stretched like skeletal fingers to hold up walls of stained glass that transformed sunlight into divine radiance. This wasn't just architecture, it was alchemy. The Gothic cathedral became the ultimate rebuttal to the priesthood's ancient claim that the divine couldn't be quantified. Every ribbed vault, every precisely angled arch whispered the same truth. God's house could be built with compasses and equations as surely as with prayers. What made this medieval revolution so extraordinary was its quiet audacity. Architects like Villard de Honnecourt didn't just sketch buildings, they encoded their notebooks with geometric secrets, tracing the hidden patterns they believed underpinned creation itself. A chapel's floor plan might mirror the proportions of Solomon's temple, while a rose window's tracery echoed the mathematical harmonies of the celestial spheres. These weren't mere blueprints, they were theological arguments in stone. For the first time, engineers weren't hiding their knowledge, they were proclaiming it as a form of worship. Yet the real surprise was the Church's embrace of this rebellion. After centuries of priestly gatekeeping, why suddenly welcome these towering testaments to human ingenuity? The answer lies in the stained glass. Those radiant mosaics of saints and scripture transformed sunlight into storytelling, bathing congregations in colored narratives that made the Bible tangible. The priests realized something profound. Engineering could be their greatest evangelist. A peasant who couldn't read Latin could still feel awe when the setting sun set the Last Judgment ablaze in crimson and gold above the altar. The cathedrals became a compromise. Engineers could push boundaries so long as their innovations illuminated doctrine, but the balance of power had undeniably shifted. Master builders like Pierre de Montreuil weren't anonymous craftsmen. They were celebrated visionaries, their names etched into the very stones they'd raised. The labyrinth laid into the floor of Chartres Cathedral didn't just symbolize spiritual pilgrimage, it was a covert tribute to the architects, its winding path mirroring the complex journey of their craft. Even the guilds guarding these secrets gained unprecedented influence, their lodges becoming repositories of knowledge that blurred the line between Mason and mystic. This medieval détente didn't erase the ancient tension, it refined it. The same churches that glorified geometry in their designs also housed relics said to defy natural law. The flying buttresses might be engineered, but the vial of holy blood displayed beneath them, that demanded faith. The Middle Ages proved that science and the sacred didn't have to be adversaries, they could be collaborators, each elevating the other. And in that fragile alliance, humanity found a new way to reach for the divine, not just through revelation, but through the perfect curve of an arch meeting the heavens. Alchemy's smoky laboratories were the perfect battleground for this ancient war, a place where mercury shimmered like celestial fluid and lead carried the weight of earthly corruption. On one bench you'd find alembics and retorts, tools as precise as any engineer's compass. On another, sacred symbols etched into glassware, invoking the names of angels to guide reactions. The alchemist wasn't just a chemist or a mystic, they were the war's ultimate double agent, speaking the language of both temple and workshop. Take Zosimos of Panopolis, a 3rd century figure who wrote of divine water that could dissolve gold, a substance we now recognize as nitric acid, but which he described in terms of spiritual purification. His manuscripts didn't just record experiments, they wove them into visions of dying and resurrecting gods. This fusion of worlds reached its peak with Hermes Trismegistus, the legendary figure who was said to have penned the Emerald Tablet. His famous maxim, "as above, so below," wasn't just poetry, it was a working principle. Alchemists believed that by manipulating matter, they could mirror cosmic transformations. When they distilled liquids, they saw the separation of chaos into elements. When they heated metals, they witnessed the soul's ascent through fire. The philosopher's stone wasn't merely a material to turn lead into gold, it was the physical manifestation of enlightenment itself. Engineers revered it as proof that nature's laws could be mastered. Priests feared it as a rival to their sacraments, but here's where the lines blurred beyond recognition. In medieval Europe, Franciscan monks like Roger Bacon practiced alchemy alongside their prayers, insisting that uncovering nature's secrets brought them closer to God. Meanwhile, in Islamic courts, scholars like Jabir ibn Hayyan systematized chemical processes while attributing their successes to divine favor. The same laboratories producing sulfuric acid, a discovery that revolutionized industry, also sought the elixir of life, a potion to cheat death. This duality made alchemy impossible to categorize. Was it heresy or innovation? The answer depended on who held the crucible. The real legacy of alchemy lies in what it forced both sides to admit. When Paracelsus replaced the four classical elements with a new system of tria prima, salt, sulfur, and mercury, he wasn't just advancing chemistry, he was proving that even the most sacred frameworks could be questioned. Yet when Isaac Newton spent decades deciphering alchemical texts, he wasn't abandoning science for superstition. He was searching for a hidden order behind both creation's physical and spiritual laws. The war didn't end in alchemy's fires, it transformed. Engineers learned that some truths required more than equations. Priests realized that revelation could wear the guise of experiment. And humanity discovered that the path to the divine might just be lit by the flickering flames of a furnace. The Vitruvian Man wasn't just a sketch, it was a manifesto. Leonardo da Vinci's iconic drawing, with its perfect proportions and geometric precision, declared something revolutionary. The human form itself was a mirror of cosmic order, measurable and divine without priestly interpretation. This was the Renaissance's quiet bombshell. After centuries of clerics insisting that truth flowed only through scripture and sacrament, here were engineers and artists proving that divinity could be decoded with compasses and observation. When Copernicus dared to place the sun, not the earth, at the center of the cosmos, he wasn't merely correcting an astronomical error, he was stripping the priesthood of their celestial authority. If the heavens moved by mathematical law rather than divine whim, what need was there for interpreters of God's will? The Church's panic was palpable. Galileo's trial in 1633 wasn't about astronomy, it was about gatekeeping. By forcing the aging scientist to renounce his findings under threat of torture, the Inquisition revealed its deepest fear, that human reason might eclipse revelation. The Index of Prohibited Books banned not just heresy, but whole fields of inquiry, from heliocentric treatises to anatomical studies. Why? Because a peasant who saw the moons of Jupiter through Galileo's telescope might start wondering what else the priests had wrong. The backlash wasn't just suppression, it was desperation. Yet for all its power, the Church couldn't unsee what the Renaissance had revealed. Architects like Brunelleschi didn't just build domes, they calculated them using linear perspective, turning churches into demonstrations of mathematical harmony. Botticelli's Birth of Venus wasn't merely a painting, it was a reclamation of pagan beauty as a path to the divine, bypassing the Vatican entirely. Even the printing press, that great equalizer, became a weapon in this silent war, scattering knowledge so widely that no priesthood could contain it. What made this resurgence so explosive was its timing. The rediscovery of Vitruvius' ancient engineering texts coincided with the Protestant Reformation, creating a perfect storm. Reformers like Luther argued that faith needed no mediator, while humanists like Erasmus insisted that studying nature was itself a form of prayer. The engineers, long forced to work in the shadows, now had allies and an audience. When Tycho Brahe built Uraniborg, his island observatory, he wasn't just tracking planets, he was creating a temple to human curiosity, where the stars were gods anyone could converse with, given the right instruments. The Renaissance didn't settle the ancient conflict, it reignited it with new ferocity. But this time, the engineers had something their pyramid-building ancestors lacked, the unstoppable momentum of an idea whose time had come. If the universe was a clockwork masterpiece, then winding its gears no longer required holy hands. Every telescope turned skyward, every dissected cadaver, every precisely drawn architectural plan was a quiet revolution. The priests could ban books and silence scientists, but they couldn't stop the truth that the divine spoke in equations as clearly as in scripture, and humanity was finally learning to listen. The roar of steam engines didn't just power factories, it shattered an ancient paradigm. For millennia, priests had stood between humanity and the forces of nature, interpreting droughts as divine displeasure and abundant harvests as celestial favor. But when James Watt's improved steam engine began pumping water from mines in 1769, something profound shifted. Here was a machine that could summon power from coal and water, indifferent to prayers or sacrifices. The engineers had done what no priesthood could. They'd made miracles reproducible. A single Lancashire textile mill, with its clattering looms powered by steam, could produce more cloth in a day than 100 weavers working by hand. Abundance was no longer a gift from the gods. It was a matter of gears and pressure valves. Yet this victory came with its own ironies. The very machines that liberated production from superstition birthed new temples, the factories, with their towering smokestacks reaching skyward like modern ziggurats. The factory owners became the new high priests, controlling access to the engines that transformed raw materials into wealth. Workers no longer bowed to statues of Demeter for a good harvest. They clocked in under the watchful eye of foremen who dictated the rhythms of their lives with mechanical precision. The Luddites who smashed looms in the early 1800s weren't merely resisting change. They recognized that the old covenant between humanity and the divine had been rewritten in coal dust and steam. What made this transformation so revolutionary wasn't just the technology, but the underlying philosophy. The engineers of the Industrial Revolution didn't ask the heavens for permission. They calculated, tested, and iterated. When George Stephenson's locomotive, the Rocket, outpaced horse-drawn carriages in 1829, it wasn't just a triumph of speed, it was proof that progress could be engineered without divine sanction. The scientific method became the new liturgy, and laboratories replaced sanctuaries as the places where mysteries were unraveled. But the old patterns reasserted themselves in surprising ways. The industrialists who built fortunes from steel and railroads often framed their wealth as a kind of divine right. Andrew Carnegie's Gospel of Wealth declared that millionaires were merely trustees of God's bounty, channeling profits into libraries and universities as if performing modern tithe. Meanwhile, the utopian socialist Robert Owen established mill towns like New Lanark with strict moral codes, blending efficiency with a quasi-religious vision of human perfectibility. The language had changed, but the tension remained. Could the architects of progress be trusted with the power they'd claimed, or would they become the new oligarchs of the machine age? Perhaps the most telling legacy of this era lies in what it didn't solve. The factories brought prosperity, but also pollution and exploitation, problems no less daunting than the famines and plagues of the ancient world. The engineers had unlocked nature's secrets, but not its wisdom, and so the cycle continued, not with priests and pyramids, but with policymakers and power grids, as humanity grappled with the same essential question: who gets to shape our relationship with the forces that govern our lives? The battlefield had moved from temple courtyards to boardrooms, but the war was far from over. Silicon Valley's gleaming campuses might seem worlds apart from the soot-stained factories of the Industrial Revolution, but the underlying struggle remains eerily familiar. Tech titans now speak of disrupting death with AI-driven longevity research, while virtual reality promises digital afterlives where consciousness lives on in cloud servers. These aren't just products, they're secular salvation narratives, repackaging humanity's oldest desires for transcendence in lines of code. When a biotech CEO claims their neural interface could one day upload memories, they're channeling the same boldness that inspired pyramid builders to map the stars in stone. Religious leaders aren't blind to the parallels. The Vatican's warnings against playing God with genetic engineering echo ancient priests' fears of engineers trespassing on divine territory. Buddhist teachers caution that algorithmically curated social media feeds create a digital attachment, while evangelical groups protest AI chatbots offering spiritual advice. The battle lines have simply migrated from temple courtyards to app stores where meditation apps compete with prayer notifications, and algorithmically suggested content shapes moral worldviews as powerfully as any sermon. Yet the most striking parallel lies in how both sides frame their authority. Ancient priests claimed exclusive access to sacred knowledge through initiation. Today's tech giants guard their algorithms as trade secrets, their data centers as impenetrable as any inner sanctum. The high priest censor has been replaced by content moderation tools, deciding what ideas get amplified or silenced. When Facebook tweaks its newsfeed algorithm or Google adjusts search rankings, they're performing a modern version of divination, interpreting user data like haruspices reading animal entrails, then presenting their conclusions as objective truth. The rise of transhumanism throws this conflict into sharp relief. Silicon Valley's most ardent futurists don't just want to extend life, they aim to redefine what being human means. Cryonics companies promise future resurrection through nanotechnology, while brain-computer interface startups like Neuralink flirt with enhancing cognition beyond natural limits. To traditional faiths, this isn't progress, it's hubris, a digital reenactment of the Tower of Babel. The irony: many transhumanist gatherings feature quasi-religious rituals, complete with choral performances about the singularity and consciousness uploading ceremonies. Even as they reject traditional spirituality, they can't escape the human need for sacred narrative. Perhaps the most hopeful development lies in the synthesis emerging at the edges. Benedictine monks collaborating with app developers to create distraction-free writing tools, rabbis using AI to analyze centuries of Talmudic debates for new insights. Engineers visiting Bhutan to study gross national happiness metrics alongside server uptime statistics. These unlikely partnerships suggest a third way where technology serves human flourishing without claiming to replace the sacred. The ancient battle may never fully end, but its latest chapter offers something new: the possibility that engineers and guardians of meaning might finally stop fighting over the same territory and start building bridges instead. The Ark of the Covenant wasn't just a golden box, it was described as a weapon. When the Israelites carried it into battle, biblical accounts claim it could level mountains and strike down enemies with what sounds suspiciously like electrical discharges. Ancient astronaut theorists point to these descriptions as proof of alien technology, but there's another possibility. What if the Ark was an engineered device, a product of lost human knowledge so advanced that later generations could only explain it as divine? The same goes for the Baghdad battery, a 2,000-year-old clay jar containing an iron rod and copper cylinder that, when filled with vinegar, produces a measurable electric current. Mainstream archaeology dismisses it as a storage vessel, but the design matches that of a basic galvanic cell. Were these artifacts remnants of a forgotten scientific tradition, one that threatened the religious establishment's monopoly on miracles? Look deeper and the pattern emerges. The dendrolite reliefs in Egypt depict what appear to be giant light bulbs with snaking filaments, connected to boxy devices reminiscent of modern batteries. The Sanskrit Vedas describe flying machines called vimanas with propulsion systems fueled by mercury vortex engines, details that align eerily with NASA's experimental ion thrusters. Even the Great Pyramid's so-called air shafts align with specific stars not during Khufu's reign, but thousands of years earlier, hinting at knowledge predating recorded history. These anomalies don't just suggest advanced tech, they imply a systematic effort to erase its origins. The real conspiracy isn't necessarily about aliens. It's about control. When the Library of Alexandria burned, countless technical manuals vanished into ash. The Gnostic texts buried at Nag Hammadi spoke of direct spiritual knowledge, bypassing priestly intermediaries until they were declared heresy. The common thread, any discovery that allowed humans to access power, whether electrical, celestial, or spiritual, without institutional approval, was labeled dangerous. The winners of history didn't just write the books, they burned the competition. Yet the most compelling evidence isn't in artifacts or texts, but in the gaps between them. Why do so many ancient cultures share nearly identical myths of a golden age when gods walked among men, only to withdraw after humans grew too prideful? Could these stories be distorted memories of a time when engineering and the sacred weren't rivals but partners? The pyramids, the Ark, the Vimanas, they might not prove aliens walked among us. They might prove something far more radical, that we once stood taller than we remember, and the path back has been deliberately obscured. The truth isn't just buried, it's been rewritten, not by extraterrestrials, but by those who feared what humans might do if they ever reclaimed their legacy. Merit To's name survives in one single inscription, Chief Physician. It reads, carved into a tomb wall in ancient Egypt around 2700 BCE. That's all we have of her, a title, a fragment of a life. Yet this scrap of evidence makes her the first woman in recorded history known by name in science or medicine. What else did she achieve that wasn't chiseled into stone? The silence speaks volumes. Across the Nile in Mesopotamia, Enheduanna's poetry to the goddess Inanna was copied for centuries, her authorship meticulously preserved, until later scribes began attributing her hymns to anonymous temple scribes. These weren't coincidences, they were casualties in a war with two fronts, the battle between engineers and priests, and the quieter, more insidious erasure of women from both sides of the conflict. The irony cuts deep. Priestesses like Egypt's divine adoratress or Babylon's Nadatu women held sacred roles that should have shielded them from obscurity. They interpreted omens, managed temple economies, even advised kings, yet their names vanish from chronicles, their contributions folded into the generic priesthood. Meanwhile, female architects and mathematicians faced an even steeper climb. When the Roman architect Vitruvius listed history's great builders, he included not a single woman, despite frescoes at Pompeii showing women wielding compasses and plumb lines alongside men. The pattern is too consistent to ignore. Whether carving hieroglyphs or calculating celestial alignments, women in antiquity weren't just fighting for recognition. They were struggling not to be written out of history entirely. But the cracks in the narrative let glimpses through. The Ebla tablets mention female overseers supervising construction projects in 3rd millennium BC Syria. A rare Babylonian contract tablet records a woman named Beltani purchasing land to build a canal, an engineer in all but name. Even the Bible's oft-overlooked Exodus passage credits Bezalel's collaborator, Oholiab, as a master artisan, but Hebrew scholars note the name is linguistically feminine. The evidence is fragmented, but it points to a truth that unsettles both traditional religious and technological histories. Women weren't just present in this ancient struggle, they may have been its most threatening players. Why threatening? Because women who mastered both sacred and technical knowledge broke the system's logic. A priestess who understood the mathematics behind temple alignments couldn't be dismissed as a mere vessel for divine whispers. A female architect who designed shrines knew whether their miraculous acoustics came from divine inspiration or carefully calculated angles. Their dual competence made them living contradictions to the either-or dogma both sides relied on. No wonder their stories were so meticulously pruned from the record. The most telling clue lies in what survives despite the purge. The Greek mathematician Hypatia's brutal murder by a Christian mob in 4th century Alexandria wasn't just about religion, it was about her refusal to separate science from teaching. Medieval convents became unexpected havens for female scholars like Hildegard of Bingen, who composed music grounded in Pythagorean harmonics while penning visionary theology. These women didn't choose sides in the ancient battle, they transcended them, and that may be the real reason their legacies were so fiercely contested. To acknowledge their contributions would have unraveled the false dichotomy at the heart of the conflict, the lie that the sacred and the scientific must always be at war. The priests of ancient Thebes didn't just warn against trespassing in sacred tombs, they etched their threats into the very stone. Death shall come on swift wings, read one curse, to he who disturbs the pharaoh's rest. Modern archaeologists found these words chillingly literal when Lord Carnarvon, the financier of Tutankhamun's excavation, died mysteriously soon after entering the tomb. Coincidence, of course, but in the ancient world, such punishments weren't left to chance. The priesthood cultivated an ecosystem of dread where every misfortune, failed crops, stillborn children, sudden illness could be framed as divine retribution for challenging tradition. Fear was their most potent tool, far more effective than any physical barrier. But the engineers weren't defenseless. Hidden within the temples they built were subtle rebellions, acoustic tricks that made statues whisper in the wind, or shafts designed to focus sunlight into sudden, blinding beams at precise moments. At the Oracle of Delphi, natural ethylene gas seeping from the earth may have induced the Pythia's trances, but the temple's construction amplified her voice through stone channels, making her prophecies echo as if from the underworld itself. These weren't mere special effects, they were psychological counterattacks. If priests could wield fear, engineers would wield awe, the kind of wonder that made a visitor's knees buckle not from terror, but from the sheer impossibility of what they witnessed. This arms race of the mind shaped civilizations. In Babylon, priests interpreted lightning strikes as omens from Marduk, while engineers diverted the Euphrates to prevent floods that could undermine their ziggurats. The same dichotomy played out in medieval Europe, where cathedral builders embedded mathematical harmonies into their designs, creating spaces where chanters' voices resonated with uncanny purity, proof that human hands could craft the sublime without clerical intercession. The battle lines weren't just drawn in stone, they were etched into human psychology. Fast forward to today and the patterns hold. Vaccine hesitancy isn't just about science, it's about deep-seated fears of tampering with nature, echoes of ancient taboos. AI anxiety mirrors the old terror of hubris, warnings against playing God recycled for the digital age. Yet just as in antiquity, breakthroughs still come wrapped in awe. Think of the first images from the James Webb Telescope, revealing cosmic dawns in swirls of gold and violet. The war between fear and wonder never ended, it just upgraded its tools. What this ancient struggle teaches us is that progress has always faced two obstacles: the tangible challenges of innovation and the psychological barriers erected to guard the status quo. The real test isn't whether we can build a better future, it's whether we can outgrow the primal instinct to fear what we don't yet understand. Sacred geometry isn't just a collection of pretty shapes, it's the closest thing we've found to a universal language. Take the flower of life, a pattern of overlapping circles found in Egyptian temples, Chinese temples, and even the notebooks of Leonardo da Vinci. Engineers saw it as a blueprint, a mathematical constant that could predict the spacing of petals or the structure of honeycombs. Priests called it the fingerprint of the gods, a sign that creation followed a divine plan. The irony, modern quantum physics now suggests they were both onto something. At the subatomic level, Particles arrange themselves in geometric patterns that mirror these ancient designs. The golden ratio, that perfect proportion found in seashells, galaxies, and the Parthenon's columns, turns up in the fractal branching of neurons and the spirals of DNA. Math doesn't just describe reality, it seems to be woven into its very fabric. Yet this revelation only deepens the mystery. When physicists speak of string theory's 10 dimensions or the holographic principle, where our three-dimensional universe might be a projection of information encoded on a two-dimensional surface, they're echoing something the temple builders knew instinctively. The ancient engineers who aligned their structures with celestial events weren't just tracking stars, they were mapping a cosmos far more interconnected than they could have imagined. The priests who encoded these patterns into rituals understood something equally profound, that numbers alone can't capture the awe of existence. The real tension isn't between science and spirituality, it's between description and meaning. Consider the way light moves through Gothic cathedrals. The stained glass isn't randomly placed. It follows geometric principles that split sunlight into spectral colors, transforming the nave into a shimmering prism. Medieval architects didn't just calculate these angles, they called them divine proportions, treating each ray as a kind of celestial Morse code. Fast forward to today, and we know exactly why the colors appear: wavelengths, refraction, the physics of light. But does that knowledge dilute the wonder or amplify it? The engineer's equations predicted the effect, but the priest's metaphors gave it resonance. This duality plays out in the most unexpected places. The mandalas of Tibetan Buddhism aren't just art, they're meditation tools based on geometric perfection, meant to mirror the mind's hidden architecture. Meanwhile, CERN particle colliders trace spirals that uncannily resemble those same mandalas, as if the universe keeps circling back to its own blueprints. The war between engineers and priests wasn't really about who owned the truth. It was about how to frame a mystery too vast for any one perspective. Maybe that's why these patterns endure. They're not just clues to how the world works, but invitations to keep asking why it exists at all. Disinformation isn't a modern invention. It's as ancient as the first civilization that realized knowledge could be weaponized. Take the Egyptian practice of damnatio memoriae, where pharaohs like Hatshepsut had their names and images systematically erased from monuments. But it wasn't just rival kings who faced this fate. Scrolls detailing engineering breakthroughs were often revised by temple scribes, their original attributions replaced with claims of divine inspiration. A papyrus describing the precise surveying techniques used to align the Great Pyramid might later surface with added passages crediting Thoth, the god of wisdom, for revealing the methods in a dream. These weren't innocent edits, they were calculated strikes in a war over who controlled the narrative of human achievement. The burning of the Library of Alexandria is often framed as a tragic accident, but look closer. While Julius Caesar's siege in 48 BC certainly caused damage, later attacks by Christian and Muslim authorities targeted specific collections. The mathematician Hypatia's murder coincided with the disappearance of her commentaries on conic sections and astronomy, works that might have revealed how much ancient engineers knew about celestial mechanics. Even the library's surviving fragments show signs of selective preservation. Treatises on astrology and ritual survive in far greater numbers than manuals on mechanics or hydraulics. This wasn't random loss, it was curation by flame. Yet the engineers fought back with ingenuity worthy of their craft. The Vitruvian man's perfect proportions aren't just artistic, they're a mathematical cipher, embedding Pythagorean ratios into art to preserve them through centuries when naked math might have been destroyed. Gothic cathedral builders hid their structural calculations in the geometries of rose windows, knowing sacred art would be protected long after technical scrolls turned to dust. Even the layout of Angkor Wat encodes astronomical data in its bas-reliefs, with certain panels only illuminated at precise solar alignments. These weren't just pretty designs, they were dead drops for future generations. The real thrill lies in cracking these codes today. When researchers realized the Antikythera mechanism's gears could predict eclipses with Babylonian arithmetic rather than Greek geometry, it revealed a hidden transmission line of knowledge, one that likely passed through temples despite priestly attempts to control it. The recent deciphering of Maya glyphs showed their mythical dates corresponded to real astronomical events, proving their astronomers were recording observations, not just priestly visions. Every breakthrough chips away at millennia of censorship, proving that while the priests may have held the pens, the engineers left their marks in something far more permanent: stone, metal, and the very bones of the earth. What makes this detective work so urgent is how it mirrors modern struggles. When a Babylonian tablet surfaces showing the exact formula for calculating interest rates, a formula later attributed to divine revelation in temple records, it's eerily reminiscent of how corporate patents now obscure open-source innovations. The ancient engineers' tactics encoding knowledge in art, hiding it in plain sight, trusting future minds to piece it together, offer a playbook for preserving truth in any age of disinformation. Their greatest lesson, stone outlasts papyrus. The truth, once carved into the world, is harder to burn than any library. The Freemasons' initiation rituals tell a story older than the pyramids: the murder of Hiram Abiff, the master builder who refused to reveal the secret words of a mason. Struck down by 3 fellow craftsmen for guarding sacred knowledge, his legend isn't just a morality tale. It's a direct echo of those ancient engineers who dared to bridge the human and the divine. When a Masonic candidate kneels blindfolded in a lodge, compass pressed to his bare chest, he's reenacting a drama that once played out in the shadow of ziggurats and obelisks. The tools aren't just symbols, they're heirlooms. The square and compass didn't originate in medieval guild halls, they were etched into Babylonian clay tablets and Egyptian tomb walls millennia earlier, always paired with celestial alignments. What makes these societies so fascinating isn't their secrecy, but their stubborn preservation of a dangerous idea: that hands shaping stone could also shape souls. Gothic cathedral builders didn't just carve gargoyles, they embedded Pythagorean harmonics into vaulted ceilings, knowing sound waves would lift chants toward heaven with mathematical precision. The Rosicrucians didn't merely study alchemy, they framed the philosopher's stone as both a metallurgical breakthrough and a metaphor for inner transformation. Even today, when Freemasons meet under vaulted ceilings painted with zodiacs, they're honoring a tradition that refused to separate the architect from the mystic. The real continuity lies in their rituals. The Masonic Working Tools lecture doesn't just teach morality through trowels and levels, it encodes the same principles Imhotep used when aligning the step pyramid to the stars. The 24-inch gauge, a direct descendant of the royal cubit rods Egyptian architects used to measure sacred proportions. The emphasis on squaring one's actions mirrors the Babylonian belief that ethical living required aligning oneself with the geometric perfection of the cosmos. These aren't coincidences, they're fragments of a lineage that survived purges, persecutions, and the deliberate rewriting of history. Yet the most compelling evidence isn't in rituals, but in rebellions. When Renaissance architects like Brunelleschi rediscovered linear perspective, they didn't find it in forgotten manuscripts. They reconstructed it from hints in Masonic-influenced guild traditions. The same networks that built Chartres Cathedral later surfaced among the Founding Fathers. Washington's Masonic apron, embroidered with compasses and pillars, wasn't just ceremonial. It signaled allegiance to an old truth, that societies rise or fall on the same principles that govern arches and keystones. The irony, these societies became exactly what the ancient priesthood feared: invisible colleges where geometry and ethics remained fused, their symbols so ubiquitous that temples, banks, and courthouses still whisper their presence to those who know how to look. The battle never ended. It just wore new costumes. When Tesla obsessed over the numbers 3, 6, and 9 as keys to the universe, he was channeling the same numerological secrets guarded by Pythagorean mystics. Modern quantum physicists speak of sacred geometry in the fractal patterns of subatomic particles, unaware they're reviving a debate as old as civilization itself. The lodges may have secularized, but their legacy lingers in plain sight, from the golden ratios in corporate logos to the celestial alignments of capital cities. The engineers didn't vanish. They went underground, leaving blueprints in the one place the priests couldn't erase: the collective memory of those who still believe that to build a better world, you must first understand its hidden architecture. Artificial intelligence doesn't just process data. It makes decisions, creates art, even mimics human speech with unsettling accuracy. In other words, it's doing things once reserved for souls. The parallels to ancient times are impossible to ignore. Just as the builders of Babylon claimed their ziggurats touched the heavens, today's engineers speak of artificial general intelligence as the next evolutionary leap. Silicon Valley's most ardent visionaries don't just want to build tools, they're crafting successors. When OpenAI's models compose poetry or DeepMind's algorithms master protein folding, it's not just technological progress, it's a quiet challenge to the idea that creativity and intuition belong exclusively to biology, or perhaps even to something divine. The backlash feels eerily familiar. Ethicists and policymakers, our modern priesthood, raise alarms about playing God, just as temple scribes once warned against trespassing on celestial mysteries. The European Union's AI Act, with its strict tiers of risk assessment, mirrors ancient prohibitions on unapproved knowledge. Even the language echoes across millennia. When a tech CEO describes AI alignment as ensuring the machine shares human values, it's not so different from Babylonian priests interpreting omens to confirm the god's favor. The stakes may have changed, but the underlying tension remains: who gets to define the boundaries of the possible? Yet history offers a sobering lesson. The priests of Ammon couldn't stop Akhenaten's solar reforms, just as the Catholic Church couldn't silence Galileo forever. Innovation has a way of outflanking dogma. Already, AI is slipping beyond centralized control. Open-source models run on hobbyists' laptops, while algorithms quietly reshape finance, medicine, and art outside any regulatory framework. Like the medieval guilds that preserved geometry in stained glass, today's underground developer communities trade neural network architectures on forums, building what authorities haven't yet thought to forbid. What makes this moment unique isn't the conflict, it's the speed. The pyramid builders had centuries to refine their craft. GPT-4 emerged barely a decade after its primitive ancestors. The velocity of change leaves little room for the gradual compromises that once tempered ancient rivalries. When an AI-generated song tops the charts or a deepfake politician sways an election, the debate isn't academic. It's existential. The engineers wield tools that reshape reality in real time, while the new priesthood scrambles to update ethics guidelines drafted for a slower world. Perhaps the most ironic twist lies in the tools themselves. Large language models are trained on humanity's collective texts, including scripture. Ask ChatGPT about morality, and it might quote Aquinas alongside Asimov. The very algorithms some fear will displace spirituality are, in a sense, the sum of our spiritual heritage. Just as Gothic cathedrals encoded sacred geometry in their arches, AI embeds our deepest questions in its weights and biases. The difference this time, the temple isn't made of stone, it's made of us. History's greatest leaps forward share a common thread, not the triumph of one side over the other, but the delicate dance between them. Consider the Islamic Golden Age, where caliphs built the House of Wisdom in Baghdad, a library so vast it made Alexandria look modest. Here, astronomers like Al-Khwarizmi refined algebra while theologians debated its use in calculating prayer times. The same courtyards where engineers developed the astrolabe to navigate by the stars also hosted scholars preserving Aristotle's works alongside Quranic commentary. This wasn't coincidence, it was collaboration, the result, a flowering of medicine, mathematics, and philosophy that lit the dark ages like a supernova. The Renaissance offers another masterclass in balance. Brunelleschi's dome in Florence didn't defy gravity through faith alone. It relied on herringbone brick patterns and hidden chains, innovations born from studying Roman ruins. Yet the same man who calculated those stresses also designed sacred spaces where light fell on altars like divine spotlighting. Michelangelo dissected cadavers to perfect human anatomy for the Sistine Chapel, blending empirical study with transcendent artistry. These eras didn't pit science against spirituality. They revealed how each could elevate the other, but the inverse is equally instructive. When the Spanish Inquisition forced Galileo to recant, or when the Library of Baghdad's destruction drowned its books in the Tigris, the losses were more than cultural, they were existential. Societies that silenced one voice in favor of the other didn't just stagnate, they unraveled. The Mayas' astronomical precision faded when priest-kings hoarded celestial knowledge as political leverage. China's Ming dynasty abandoned naval exploration after Confucian scholars deemed it wasteful, burning treasure ship blueprints that might have changed world history. The warning echoes into our era. Climate change demands both technological innovation and ethical frameworks. AI development needs coders and philosophers at the same table. The ancient conflict wasn't just about who controlled divine power. It was about recognizing that power's full potential requires multiple lenses. The engineers gave us the tools to reshape the world. The priests reminded us why we should. Neither alone could prevent an asteroid strike or engineer a pandemic response, just as neither alone built Chartres Cathedral. Perhaps the most humbling lesson lies in what the rivals secretly shared. The Egyptian engineers who aligned pyramids to Orion's belt and the priests who chanted to Osiris both sought the same thing: connection to something greater than themselves. The difference was merely dialect. One spoke in angles, the other in allegory. Our survival may hinge on relearning that bilingualism, on understanding that the next great breakthroughs won't come from Silicon Valley or the Vatican alone, but from the uncharted space where their visions intersect. The past's greatest gift isn't its blueprints or its prayers, but the proof that humanity thrives when we stop fighting over the keys to the cosmos and start building doors wide enough for all to walk through. There's a reason this ancient battle still resonates today, because it was never really about temples or blueprints. It was about the fundamental tension at the heart of being human, the pull between mystery and mastery. The priests guarded the sacred because they understood that awe binds communities together. The engineers pushed boundaries because they knew that progress is how we survive. And somewhere between those two impulses, civilization found its rhythm. Look at the megaliths of Göbekli Tepe, carved 12,000 years ago with animal figures so precise they could be anatomical studies. Those stones weren't just altars, they were textbooks blending art, astronomy, and spirituality into a single language. Fast forward to today, and the same fusion powers everything from particle accelerators to meditation apps. We're still building cathedrals, they just look like quantum labs and digital metaverses now. What both sides missed, and what we're still learning, is that the divine power they fought over wasn't locked in temples or equations. It was in the space between them. When Babylonian astronomers mapped Venus's cycles to predict harvests, they weren't just serving priests or kings, they were feeding families. When medieval masons encoded musical harmonies into vaulted ceilings, they weren't just showing off, they were creating spaces where grief and joy could resonate louder. The real conflict wasn't between science and religion, it was between gatekeepers and bridge builders. That's why this history matters now more than ever. As AI rewrites creativity and bioengineering redraws the boundaries of life, we're replaying the oldest script with new actors. Will we hoard knowledge like the priests of Ammon, or share it like the guilds that smuggled geometry into cathedral designs? Will we treat breakthroughs as threats or as tools to elevate everyone? The answer isn't in choosing sides, but in remembering what the engineers and priests forgot, that the greatest breakthroughs happen when we stop fighting over who owns the light and start building windows big enough for all to see through. So the next time you marvel at a skyscraper's silhouette against the sunset, or feel a shiver during a choir's high note, you're witnessing the ceasefire in that ancient war. The engineers gave us the tools to touch the stars, the priests taught us why we should reach for them, and the rest, that's up to us. If history's taught us anything, it's that the future belongs not to those who claim divine power, but to those who recognize it in each other. Now it's your turn. What bridges will